Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you two different ways to rig a fishing float so you can take advantage of float fishing on your next fishing adventure. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel because it helps us out a lot, and let's get straight to it. Now when it comes to choosing the right size float, the most important thing is that you make sure the float you choose is able to support the weight of your bait as well as your sinker or anything else that you might have on your rig. So for example, if you were to use this 80-gram float, that's 80 grams total weight that the float can support before it gets pulled under the surface of the water. So if you're using a whole pilchard, that would weigh roughly 20 to 30 grams, which would mean that you can use a maximum 40 to 50 gram sinker weight with this float before it will get pulled under the surface of the water. So for this video, I'll be using an 80-gram float to show you two different ways that you can rig a float. Now the first method is to rig the float on your leader. For this method, I like to place a bead on the leader and pull it down all the way to the knot that's connecting your hook to the actual leader. That way, once you add your sinker onto your leader, it protects the knot from the sinker. So now we'll add the sinker on. And as you can see, the sinker doesn't sit directly above the knot, so you don't have to worry about the sinker wearing out the knot. Now with this method, a little trick, if you put a float stopper on your line so that it sits below your actual float, what will happen is, if you get bitten off, you won't lose your float because the float stopper will stop the float from falling off the line. So once you've got your float stopper on, now it's time to put the float on. Now you want to start from the bottom of the float because it's going to be sitting on your leader, not on your main line. So you'd go from the bottom up instead of the top down. You just want to push the line through until it comes out the top. As you can see, your float now stops at the float stopper. Now the advantage of this is that if you get bitten off and you lose the bottom part of your rig, you won't lose your float. But I still actually prefer to rig it without the float stopper, and the reason being is you get a way better cast if your float is right above your weight, because then you've got all your weight in one place. So put the float back on. So I prefer to have the float sitting directly above your rig. So now once you add your bait on, when you're casting, all the weight is all in one place. So you're not going to have your weight and your sinker and your float all pulling against each other when you cast, and you actually get a much better cast when you rig this way. So this is personally my preferred method, and all you need to do now is basically just tie on your swivel using whichever knot you prefer. I generally just use the uni knot for pretty much everything because that knot has never failed me. So you just need 4 or 5 wraps, pull the tag, pull the main line. Now you should be lubricating your line before you pull it tight so you don't singe it, but since I'm not actually using this rig, just for demonstration, I skipped that step, and that's pretty much it. So you've got sinker with a bead to protect the knot that's connecting your hook to your leader, and the float directly above the sinker, and then the rest of your leader to your swivel, and then you just connect your swivel to your main line. Now, second way to rig a float is you would have your leader with your hook, and you will tie that directly to the swivel, again using whichever knot you prefer. I'm just going to go with the uni knot, like so, and there we go. Just cut that tag off. So that's your leader with your swivel, and then you'll have your main line. Now with this rig, with this method of tying on a float, everything is on your main line rather than on your leader. So the first thing you would do is you would put a float stopper on your main line to limit how far up the float can go up your main line. So we'll add the float stopper like so, and now feed it up so you have enough space to put your float on. Now this time you want to start from the top of the float instead of from the bottom. so that it's sitting the right way up once you actually rig it. So feed your main line through your float. There we go. And then you place your sinker directly below the float. So then you'll put your sinker on, and then you tie your main line to the other side of the swivel, like so. Now I'm just going to use a uni knot, but you can use whichever knot you're most comfortable with. There we go. Pull it tight, and then cut the tag end off, like so. Now, the way this rig works is you'll have your float stopper to limit how far up the float can go once it hits the water. Okay, so you can place your float stopper pretty much wherever you want. So you have your float stopper, the float will stop at the float stopper, and then you've got your sinker directly below the float to keep the float level in the water, with your swivel to stop your sinker going all the way down to your hook, and then your leader on the other side of that swivel with your hook. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're float fishing is your rig is going to go in whichever direction the current is moving. So if there's other people around, you might end up tangling, so just make sure you keep that in mind. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.